there was this girl named Fanny, who was chosen by her aunt to come live with her and the rest of her family at Mansfield Park, their manor. So the aunt sent a chariot to pick her up and drive her to the manor. On the way, the chariot stopped as the driver had to adjust the horses' harnesses. They stopped near the coast, and in the water there was a slave ship. The cries of the slaves reached the chariot while the driver was adjusting the harnesses. As Fanny, the girl, addressed this, she asked the driver, "What are those sounds?" The driver said, "Those are the slaves, the black cargo brought to England by some rich guy, a doctor or landowner." He didn't go deeper into it, as he has finished adjusting the harnesses, and they drove off. 5 o'clock the next morning, they reached Mansfield Park, where they were greeted by Tom, the owner's son, who was at this point very drunk. Being the drunk he was, he just asked the driver to drop Fanny off. The driver did. Fanny was left to stand in the cold for 2 hours before Mrs. Norris, the aunt who arranged for her to be brought there, arrived to take her into the house. Inside the house, she met Sir Thomas, the head of the house, the owner of the manor, Mansfield Park. Mrs. Norris and Sir Thomas didn't exactly go toe to toe on the terms of Fanny's quarters. So she was sent outside into the stair hall, where she encountered Maria and Julia, Sir Thomas's 2 daughters. Maria and Julia briefly greeted her, proceeded into the hall where Mrs. Norris and Sir Thomas had come to an agreement. Fanny stayed by the stairs, but were able to listen into Mrs. Norris and Sir Thomas talking to the girls through the door which the girls forgot to close. She heard Sir Thomas warn Julia and Maria about Fanny as she were to live in the main house, that she might be a bit of vulgarity, be a little rough on the edges, given that she was a girl from a lower class. So, if we take a look at the characters, we have first Fanny, of course, who is our little girl in the chariot. She is sweet, she's a bit blunt on certain matters, not knowing how to orientate around the higher class. She is also a bit nervous about her current situation, being forced into an upper class home as this lower class child that she is. She's rough on the edges, small, dark haired and pale. She's also very polite, intelligent and curious about the current situation that she's in, trying to make some sense of it, not trying to bother anyone. She's also calm, collected, quiet, down to earth, and good natured, trying to take it as it comes. Look on the bright side. On the other hand, in the very, very other end of the spectrum, we have Mrs. Norris. She is very, very strict. She's full of herself and she is very rude. She's middle-aged and wears a housekeeper uniform. She is married to Mr. Norris, who we are not seeing, and she is the aunt to Fanny. So she is Fanny's mother's sister. She is the one to take care of Fanny's education. Furthermore, she is very, very dominating. She tramples on everyone else in the household. She is trying to force her opinion out and gaining power almost at the point where she equals Mr. or Sir Thomas, she is not a part of the household as she lives in the parsonage. So Thomas is somewhere in between. He is kind and more relaxed than Mrs. Norris. He is, though, bearing an upper class attitude, but he is not arrogant in the same way that Mrs. Norris is. It is more like he feels pity for Fanny's lack of education and class. He is the head of Mansfield Park. He is married to Lady Bertram, and he is the father of Julia and Maria. And first, from the beginning, he is trying to be kind to Fanny. So, a very important part of this is class. We have Fanny, who is from the lower class and has a lower class approach to certain things. Amongst others, how to speak with people. We see her trying to make a conversation with both the chariot driver, who is not upper class but maybe middle class, where she's going head on, just asking, and they have this normal conversation where perhaps the chariot driver is speaking a little bit down to her, not in a mean way, but more in like, you're a child and do not quite understand way. And we see her trying to make a conversation with Mrs. Norris and Sir Thomas, where she is broadly cut off by Mrs. Norris and told to stay where she is, stay in place. This is not your conversation. You are a lower class girl, you do not belong here, you do not speak unless you're spoken to. We also get kind of the feeling that the lower class is more of a tight bunch. They are more relaxed generally, whereas the upper class is very strict and formal, making these small bows when they meet each other, speaking in a very formal tone. Would you like to please go outside, Miss Fanny? For example, the families themselves in the upper class are also a bit segregated. They have this little class inside the family, whereas we have the head of the house, then household and wife, then kids, and then that kind of stuff, which also goes well, is shown when they speak to each other. Even though Mrs. Norris is married, even though Mrs. Norris is the sister to Sir Thomas' wife, she still calls him Sir. They do not have a familiar tone. So, and another important fact to note on this is the imperialism is very, very strongly represented. Perhaps not in this clip. We have the brief encounter with the slave ship, which we know from other things are a ship coming from Africa with slaves. Perhaps it has been in America, perhaps it's on its way. But we know this is the big part, and it is later revealed that Sir Thomas has gotten rich on slave trade too. So this is a family built up on the imperialistic ideals.
When we're shooting a scene in a movie, we have different opportunities to make an impact on the audience. We have different movements we can do with the camera. We can make a zoom view, we can make a close-up view to get the emotions of the characters that we're focusing on. This could be like Fanny's while she's watching at the slave ship, curiosity, but it could also be fear or, well, the I don't care stone face. We can also zoom a little bit out so we get the body language of the person who is speaking, or we can have focus on two persons at the same time while they're in a dialogue. This is used in the clip while we're watching Fanny and Mrs. Norris. They are use this middle zoom to get an impression of Miss Norris's rushing to get into the Mansfield Park and to get Fanny's tight body language, which indicates that she's not really comfortable with the situation. The last type of shot we can use is a long shot, which is used to get portrayed a whole landscape. For example, when we're looking at the ship in the bay, then we can see both the bay and the ship and the sea, so we get this impression of a whole landscape. The second thing we can do is that we can adjust the angles which we are shooting in. We can use it from, we can see the movie from a frog's perspective to make a person feel more powerful and stronger. This is used on Sir Thomas, which is the most powerful person in the clip, because he's the one who owns the mansion. If we go down a little bit, we get the eye-to-eye level, which makes two persons equal. We see it when we are looking at Fanny and the coachman of the chariot. Both Fanny and the coachman doesn't mean a whole lot to the inhabitants of Mansfield Park, and so they are shown equal. The last perspective we can have is the bird's perspective, which is used to look down on other people, to make them look more meaningless and pointless to the others. This is used when we are looking at Fanny, because she doesn't mean a whole lot to Sir Thomas. The last thing we can do with the camera is that we can move it in directions. We can move it horizontally to make a panorama view and get a 360 shooting of a landscape. We are using this while we are traveling alongside Mansfield Park to get an impression of how big the mansion is. We can also move the camera vertically to get a shooting from both what's happening down on the ground, but also what's happening up in the sky. The last thing we can do is we can choose to have a steady cam on a tripod, for example, or we can have a handheld cam. The steady cam, which is used in the clip, makes a calm picture which is not disturbing, and it's nice to look at. And it senses, well, relative calm scene. If we chose to make a handheld scene, then it would be disturbing and chaotic, which ain't what Mansfield Park is. So that's basically what options we have when we want to make an impression on the audience. So when we're editing a movie, then we can still edit the movie so we see the movie from a different point of view than it was originally shooting at. For example, in the clip, then we're both looking down on Fanny, but most of the time we're feeling with Fanny, and we are capturing her emotions, because that's how we edited it. We made more scenes with Fanny than we did from Sir Thomas's point of view. So the point of view in the clip is from Fanny's point of view, but we're also this fly on the wall who can see everything that's going on. We can see that in the last minutes of the clip, where we're both looking at Fanny standing outside the door in the hallway with the stairs, but we're also looking into the other hall, where we are seeing what Sir Thomas and Miss Norris and Julia and Maria is doing. So the point of view in the clip would be Fanny's point of view, but also the fly on the wall. When we're editing, we can make long takes or we can make short takes. The long takes are slow-paced editing that signals calmness, that makes a scene more floating, and The fast-paced ones would be disturbing and a bit chaotic. Both takes have been used in the clip. We can see in the start where Fanny is traveling, then it's some long takes, which gives us that it's a calm travel and it's nice. And then when she then arrives to Mansfield Park, then it's transferred into short takes, which makes it a little bit more chaotic and new, but a little bit more exciting too. It gives a bit hectic sequence because Miss Norris is rushing with Fanny to get her into the rules and into the house before the day ends. Looking at the sound, then we have both diegetic sound, which is sound from the scene where it was taken, and we have non-diegetic sound, which comes from another source than where the movie was shot. As long as there's dialogue and while we are inside the Mansfield mansion, then we are having diegetic sound because we only have the sound within the area that we're shooting. But when we are having these panorama scenes, then we can hear the non-diegetic sounds that, for example, is music, background music. Moving further on into the light and the colors, then we have a pretty standard view of colors and a standard color circle, which only contains the color of the time the scene was shot. For example, the morning scenes and the night scenes were taken at night, so clearly we have low vision and a dark color filter because, well, it's night. And the daylight, well, it's natural daylight, so there's no filter or symbolism or anything inside the movie. And, well, that is, well, pretty equal. Pretty much what there is to say about the clip in more technical terms.